When my husband built this home, I thought he built it for us, for our laughter, for our mornings filled with coffee and sunlight, for our children's footsteps running across the wooden floors. But now, when I walk through these rooms, all I hear is silence, a silence that isn't peaceful. It's heavy, like it's trying to say something I can't quite bear to hear. Sometimes I catch myself talking to the walls, not because I've lost my mind, but because they're the only ones that still remember the sound of us. The sound of him humming under his breath as he fixed a shelf, the clinking of glasses from our first dinner in this house, my own laughter echoing off the kitchen tiles when he told a terrible joke just to make me smile. It's strange how a place can hold memories so tightly, even after the people inside start to drift apart. This house, our home, feels like a museum now. Everything's in its place, but it all feels frozen, and somehow, I'm the only one still walking through it, dusting the past. I still remember the day we moved in. It was raining, not heavily, just that quiet kind of drizzle that makes everything look softer. He carried me across the threshold, laughing, pretending to be the gentleman he always joked he wasn't. I remember how warm his arms felt, how proud he looked. "This is it," he said, his eyes shining. "Our forever home." I believed him. And for a long time, it really did feel like forever. He built this house with his own hands. Not literally. We hired people, of course. But every corner had his touch. He picked the design, the wood, the color of the walls. He cared about the small things, how the light would fall in the living room at sunset, how the fireplace should be placed so it could be seen from the kitchen. It mattered to him that everything felt just right. And back then, I thought that meant we were just right too. Our life was simple. We weren't perfect, but we were comfortable. Mornings started with him reading the paper at the kitchen table, his coffee always a little too strong, while I tried to make breakfast before heading to work. Evenings were filled with small things, cooking together, watching movies we'd already seen, arguing playfully over whose turn it was to take out the trash. It wasn't exciting, but it was ours. We had 2 kids, both grown now. When they were little, this house was alive. Every wall knew their laughter. Every room had traces of their chaos. Crayons on the table, shoes by the stairs, cereal spilled in places I'd find days later. He used to say, "One day we'll miss this mess." And he was right. Because now, I'd give anything to have that noise back. When the kids left for college, the house grew quieter. At first it felt peaceful, a kind of rest we'd earned after years of raising a family. We could finally sit on the porch in the evenings, just the 2 of us, watching the sunset with no interruptions. But slowly that quiet started to change. It stopped feeling like peace. It started feeling like distance. It wasn't one big fight or betrayal. No slammed doors, no shouted words. Just a slow unraveling, the kind that sneaks up on you. You don't even notice it happening until one day you wake up and realize you've both stopped trying to talk, stopped trying to reach each other. He still lives here, of course. We share this same roof, this same address. But sometimes it feels like we live in 2 different worlds. He sits in his study most nights, staring at his laptop, pretending to be busy. I sit by the window in the living room, pretending not to notice how quiet it's become. It's amazing how 2 people can share a home and still feel like strangers. I try to remember when it started. The silence, I mean. Maybe it was after his mother passed. He didn't talk much about it, and I didn't press him. He was always proud, the kind of man who carried his pain quietly. And I thought giving him space was love, but maybe he needed me to do the opposite, to push, to ask, to stay close. Or maybe it was when I started feeling lonely and didn't know how to say it without sounding ungrateful. Because from the outside we had everything. A beautiful house, grown children doing well, no real problems to complain about. Who was I to say something was missing? But something was missing, and that something kept growing between us. Invisible, but wide. Sometimes I'd try to bridge it. I'd cook his favorite dinner, hoping it might bring back the easy laughter we once shared. He'd thank me politely, smile faintly, and go back to his phone. Other times I'd try to start a conversation. How was work? Or, did you see that news about the lake project? Small talk that used to lead somewhere. But now his answers were short. Fine. Yeah, I saw. Nothing much. Then I'd fall silent again. Because I didn't know what else to say. Because after a while, silence feels safer than rejection. I tell myself it's not his fault. Maybe this is just what happens when love grows old. It settles, it cools, it gets tired. But some nights when I hear him walking down the hall, I remember how it used to be. How we used to talk about everything and nothing until we fell asleep. And it hurts, because I can still feel that version of us somewhere deep down, buried under years of small distances. We used to dance in the kitchen. He'd put on a song from the radio, something old and soft, and pull me close even if I was in the middle of cooking. I'd laugh, pretending to resist, but he'd spin me around until we both ended up laughing too hard to keep going. Now the kitchen is spotless, quiet, perfect, and I hate it. I'd rather have burnt food and messy counters if it meant hearing him laugh again. Every night I turn off the lights in the living room, check the doors, and walk down the same hallway toward our bedroom. He's usually already there, lying on his side of the bed, facing the wall. We say goodnight politely, like roommates. Sometimes I lie there staring at the ceiling, wondering how something so full of love could end without a single word. No big fight, no ending. Just silence. I still wear my wedding ring. Not because I'm holding on, but because I don't know how to take it off. It feels like part of me, like my skin. Sometimes I catch him looking at his own ring too, twisting it absent-mindedly. And I wonder if he feels the same. If he's as lost as I am, pretending everything's fine because we don't know how to start over. This house is beautiful, but it's also a constant reminder of what we used to be. Every corner whispers, "Remember when?" The porch where we used to drink wine on summer nights. The living room where we decorated the tree with the kids every Christmas. The small dent on the wall from when he tried to hang a picture frame and missed. All these little things. They're like ghosts that won't leave me alone. Sometimes I think about leaving. Just packing a small bag and driving somewhere far away. Not because I hate him, but because I don't know who I am here anymore. But then I think of the memories, the years, the promises we made, and I stay. Because even though this silence hurts, it's familiar, and maybe I'm afraid to find out what life sounds like without him in it at all. There's something strange about living beside someone you love and realizing you don't really see them anymore. We cross paths every day. In the hallway, the kitchen, sometimes even in the garden, yet it feels like we've both become invisible. Two people sharing air, but not connection. I started noticing small things first. He began eating earlier than me. At first, he said it was because he was hungry after work, but soon it became a habit. I'd walk into the kitchen at 7, find his plate washed, and leftovers covered neatly with foil. He'd say, "I thought you'd eaten already." I'd smile, pretending I had. And that's how our dinners, our simple, comforting ritual, quietly disappeared. We used to watch movies together every Friday night. That was our thing. No matter how busy we were, we'd always make time for it. He'd pick something slow and meaningful, and I'd pretend to complain, saying I wanted something lighter. But I always loved his choices, because they made him come alive, made him talk about stories, about people, about emotions. Then one week he said, "You go ahead, I'm tired tonight." And the next week he said it again. Eventually I stopped asking. It wasn't that we fought. It was worse than that. We just stopped trying. Some mornings I'd wake up early, make coffee, and sit by the kitchen window watching the sunrise. He used to join me for that too. Now, I'd hear his footsteps going straight to his office instead. No words, no good morning, just the sound of the door closing softly behind him. I began wondering if he was unhappy, if maybe I'd done something to push him away without realizing it. I replayed our conversations in my head, the small remarks, the quiet moments, trying to find where I might have gone wrong. But there wasn't one big thing, just a series of small silences, stacking one on top of another until they became walls. I tried to reach him in small ways. Once I bought his favorite dessert from the little bakery downtown, lemon tart, the one he used to bring home when we were dating. When he came home that evening, I set it on the table with 2 forks. He smiled faintly, said thank you, and ate half while scrolling through his phone. I waited for a story, a memory, something, but all I got was silence and the sound of a fork against the plate. Later that night, I went upstairs and sat on the edge of our bed. He was reading, his glasses sliding slightly down his nose. "Do you ever feel," I asked quietly, "like we've lost something?" He looked up, confused. "Lost what?" I hesitated. "Us." He blinked, then gave a small smile, the polite kind, not the warm kind. "We're just busy," he said, turning a page. "Things change, that's all." I wanted to tell him it wasn't just busy, that I missed the sound of his laugh, the way he'd hold my hand while we talked about nonsense, the way we used to share our dreams late into the night. But I didn't, because he already looked tired and I didn't want to make things heavier. So instead I said, "You're right," and smiled back. And just like that, another moment slipped away. I started talking more to myself after that, not in a sad or dramatic way, just to fill the air. While cooking, while folding clothes, while watering the plants, it felt less empty when I did. Sometimes, I'd talk to the photo frames, especially the one from our anniversary trip to Italy. We looked so happy in that picture, sunburned, laughing, wind in our hair. It felt like someone else's life. Our daughter called one evening. She asked how we were doing, and I said, "Good. Just the same." She laughed, said, "You two have always been steady." And I smiled because I didn't have the heart to tell her the truth. That steady was just another word for stuck. Later that night, I mentioned to him that she'd called. He nodded, eyes on the TV, said, "That's nice." No follow-up, no warmth. And I realized how even our children's names had become distant sounds in our house. A few weeks later, I found an old notebook in the drawer of his study. Inside there were sketches, floor plans, designs, ideas. He used to love drawing them, back when we were planning this home. In the margins, he'd written little notes. Add window here, sunlight in morning, make space for reading corner. Reading those scribbles made my chest tighten. He'd poured so much of himself into this place, and somewhere along the way, we stopped building us and only kept maintaining it. That night, I stood in the hallway, staring at the house around me, the house he built with such care. It was beautiful, strong, solid, and yet it felt emptier than ever. I whispered, "What happened to us?" But of course, the walls had no answer. Around that time, I started noticing he'd begun staying late at work. Sometimes he'd come home past midnight, saying there was a project, a meeting, or some deadline. I wanted to believe him, and I did. But a small voice inside me wondered if maybe work wasn't the only reason. Not because I thought he was with someone else, but because maybe he just didn't want to come home. And that hurt more than anything. One night he came home late again. The lights were dim, the TV was off, and I was sitting in the armchair with a blanket. He looked surprised to see me awake. "You should sleep," he said softly. "I couldn't," I replied. He hesitated, then added, "Long day." I nodded, waiting for him to say more. He didn't. He walked past me, up the stairs, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the silence. I sat there long after, listening to the house settle around me, creaking softly like it was sighing too. The next morning, I decided to clean his study. He hated when I did that, said I moved things around, but I wanted to feel useful, to do something for him. While dusting, I found an old mug, chipped, stained with coffee. It was the one I gave him on his birthday years ago. It said, "World's Best Husband." I smiled sadly, tracing the faded letters with my thumb. He must have kept it out of habit, not sentiment, but still, it meant something that it was there. That night, I left the mug on his desk with a note. "Thought you might want this clean again. Love, M." Simple, quiet. He didn't mention it the next day, but I noticed it had been moved and cleaned. A small thing, but it felt like a whisper of connection, a reminder that maybe, deep down, something still lingered between us. For a little while I tried again, small gestures, a hand on his shoulder when I walked past, a warm smile in the morning, a cup of coffee left by his side before he woke up. He'd smile back, sometimes even say, "Thank you." And for a few seconds, it almost felt like we were finding our way back. But it never lasted. Because love, once left unattended for too long, doesn't die all at once. It fades slowly, quietly, until even the effort to revive it feels forced. One weekend, we were both home. The house felt heavy with quiet, and I couldn't take it anymore. So I suggested we go out. Maybe dinner, maybe just a drive. He looked uncertain, then said, "Sure, if you want." We went to a small restaurant we used to visit when we were newly married. The food tasted the same, but the air between us didn't. I tried to start a conversation. "Remember the first time we came here? You dropped your fork, and the waiter looked terrified." He chuckled politely, said, "Yeah, that was funny," then went back to eating. We finished our meal mostly in silence, and on the drive home, I watched his face reflected in the window. Calm, distant, unreadable. I wondered if he was thinking about me at all. That night I cried for the first time in a long while. Not loud, not broken, just quiet tears that rolled down without asking. Because I realized I wasn't just missing him, I was missing us, the version of us that laughed, dreamed, and built a life together, and I didn't know if that version could ever come back. After that, I stopped trying so hard. I still cooked, cleaned, smiled, but the spark inside me dimmed. I accepted our silence as part of life. He must have felt it too, because he stopped trying as well. We both settled into this quiet rhythm, this delicate balance of coexistence. We didn't fight, we didn't talk much. We just existed side by side, like two shadows moving through the same space. Sometimes I think that's the saddest kind of ending. Not the explosive one with tears and shouting, but the slow one where love fades without anyone noticing until it's too late to bring it back. It was early autumn when things began to shift. The air outside had grown colder, the trees turning shades of amber and gold. I always loved that time of year, the way the world feels like it's winding down, preparing for silence. Maybe that's why I didn't notice at first. Maybe I thought the quiet between us was just another season passing through. That morning, I was in the kitchen making tea. He came down later than usual, moving slower, rubbing his temples. "You okay?" I asked gently. "Yeah," he murmured. "Didn't sleep well." He looked pale, almost gray around the edges. I offered him some tea, and for once, he didn't refuse. He sat at the table, staring into the cup, as if it held something more than just warm water and leaves. For a moment, I saw the man I married, tired, human, fragile, and I felt something stir inside me, a mixture of concern and longing. "Maybe you should take it easy today," I said. He nodded absently. "Yeah, maybe." Then silence, the kind that makes you aware of every breath, every tiny sound in the room. Later that afternoon, I heard him coughing from his study, deep, rough, persistent. I knocked softly. "Come in," he called out, his voice hoarse. He was sitting at his desk, a hand pressed to his chest. "You sound terrible," I said, stepping closer. "It's just a cold," he replied. But his face told a different story. I touched his forehead. He was burning up. "You need to rest," I said firmly. He tried to protest, but I was already leading him toward the couch. For the first time in months, he didn't resist. I made him soup, brought him medicine, sat beside him while he drifted in and out of sleep. And in that small, quiet moment, tending to him, watching over him, something softened between us. He looked at me with tired eyes and whispered, "You've always taken care of me." It wasn't a grand statement, but it felt like one. I smiled and said, "It's what we do, remember?" He gave a faint nod, then closed his eyes again. We stopped sitting together at meals. We slept facing opposite sides. And the house, this beautiful home he built with his own hands, started to feel like a museum of what we used to be. Everything perfectly placed, perfectly lifeless. Sometimes I'd walk through the rooms at night, touching the walls, the furniture, the doorknobs. It's strange. The house was still solid, sturdy, warm, but it no longer felt like ours. It felt like a story that ended, but no one remembered to close the book. One evening, there was a storm, heavy rain, wind shaking the windows. I was in the kitchen making tea. He came in, drenched from fixing something outside. For a second, we just looked at each other. Two strangers in the same home, both pretending to be fine. He said quietly, The roof's leaking again. I nodded. I'll call someone tomorrow. Then he turned away, and that was that. It hit me then. This was all that was left of us. Small exchanges about broken things, while something much bigger had already fallen apart. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window and watched the rain. It looked like the sky was finally crying for us. All the tears I couldn't shed. And in that moment, I understood something. Love doesn't always end with shouting or betrayal. Sometimes it just fades until it becomes background noise, like the hum of the fridge or the ticking of the clock. You stop noticing it until one day you realize it's gone completely. The next morning, I packed a small bag, not to leave permanently. I didn't even know where I'd go. I just needed space. I left a note on the kitchen table that said, "I need some air." He didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't ask where I went. I spent the next few days by the sea, in a small coastal town 2 hours away. The air was sharp, the waves restless. It was the first time in years I'd felt something move inside me. I walked along the beach every morning, listening to the sound of the ocean. It wasn't silence. It was alive, breathing, changing. It reminded me that quiet doesn't have to mean emptiness. I thought a lot about him, about us, about how we'd started with so much promise, and somehow ended up strangers sharing a roof. There was no single moment to blame. Just a series of small, unspoken choices. A missed good morning, an ignored how was your day, averted eyes at dinner. That's how love dies. Not all at once, but piece by piece, until all you have left are habits and history. When I finally went back home, 3 days later, he was in the same spot, sitting on the couch, staring at the TV. He looked up when I came in, then nodded slightly. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I replied, and that was it. No questions. No, "Where were you?" No, "I missed you." I realized then that he didn't notice I was gone, or maybe he did but didn't care enough to say it. I unpacked quietly, made myself some tea, and for the first time I didn't make a second cup. That evening I stood outside on the porch looking at the house, the one he built with such pride. The same porch where we once laughed, dreamed, argued, kissed. It looked beautiful in the golden light, almost perfect, but it wasn't home anymore. Home isn't walls or furniture. It's the warmth between people, and when that warmth fades, even the most beautiful house becomes a shell. As the sun set, I whispered to myself, maybe this is how love ends. Quietly, without goodbyes. And I meant it, because sometimes endings don't need closure. They just need acceptance. It's been almost a year since that evening. The house is the same, maybe a little quieter. Maybe I just notice it more now. The walls still hold his touch. The floors still creak the way they used to. And every morning the light still spills through the same window where we once shared coffee. He still lives here. And so do I. But in truth, we live beside each other, not with each other. Sometimes I catch him in the garden again, trimming the bushes or fixing the fence. He doesn't hum anymore. He used to, always some tune that would get stuck in my head. Now there's just the sound of clippers, steady and mechanical. I wonder if he notices how quiet it's become. Or maybe for him, this is peace. I think about leaving some days. I've looked at apartments online, thought about how it would feel to start over, to have a small place that's truly mine. But every time I picture walking away, I see him sitting here alone, in the silence he built, and my heart softens, just enough to stay a little longer. It's not love anymore. Not really. It's something gentler, duller, maybe pity, maybe history. But it still ties me to him in a way I can't explain. We share polite words now. "Did you eat?" "Yeah." "Want some tea?" "Maybe later." Tiny, empty exchanges that pretend to mean something. It's strange how language can survive long after meaning dies. Sometimes I wonder if he ever regrets it. The way we stopped trying. The way we let silence take our place. But I've learned that some people aren't built for talking. They're built for enduring. And maybe he endures me, just as I endure him. A few weeks ago, I found an old notebook in the drawer, my handwriting from years ago, filled with lists and notes from when we were planning this house. There were sketches of furniture, color palettes, even reminders like buy curtains for the guest room or plant daisies by the mailbox. I smiled at the innocence of it, that hopeful version of me who believed a beautiful home would always mean a happy one. She didn't know that walls can't hold a marriage together. I still paint sometimes, just small things, flowers, landscapes, simple scenes. I hang them around the house now. He never says anything about them, but once I saw him stop and look at one for a while before walking away. That small pause was enough for me. It's funny. You stop expecting grand gestures. You start cherishing moments that barely exist. There's a strange kind of peace in that. Not joy, not fulfillment, just acceptance. Acceptance that not all stories end with warmth. Acceptance that sometimes love finishes quietly, like a song fading out instead of stopping. And maybe that's okay. Maybe not every ending needs to be tragic or beautiful. Maybe some just are. These days I take long walks in the evenings. I watch the sky change colors, listen to children playing somewhere down the street. The world still moves, even when your own world stands still. That realization is comforting, knowing life doesn't wait for anyone to heal. When I come home after those walks, the house looks softer somehow. Like it's learned to hold both our silences without judgment. It doesn't demand laughter. It doesn't echo our past. It just stands, steady, patient, understanding. Sometimes I whisper a quiet thank you to it. Not for what it gave us, but for what it witnessed. For holding me when I couldn't hold him anymore. I used to think love was about holding on. Now I know it's also about letting things be. Even when they hurt, even when they fade. There's a lesson in all of this, I think. That you can't build a home out of love that no longer lives. That silence isn't always cruel. Sometimes it's just the sound of truth settling in. And that people change, even when the house stays the same. I don't know how long I'll stay here. Maybe a few more years. Maybe forever. But I've stopped waiting for the sound of his voice to fill the rooms again. I've learned to fill them with my own instead. With quiet footsteps, the rustle of pages, the clink of my teacup on the table. It's not the life I imagined, but it's a life I can live. And for now, that's enough. So when people ask me if I'm lonely, I smile. Because loneliness doesn't always mean emptiness. Sometimes it's just the quiet space where peace finally has room to grow. And in that space, in that silence, I've found something that almost feels like freedom. That night, as he slept on the couch, I covered him with a blanket and stood there for a long time, just watching him breathe. And for the first time in what felt like years, I felt close to him again, not because he needed me, but because I remembered how much I still cared. Over the next few days, he began to recover. He thanked me, quietly, awkwardly, and I could see in his face that he meant it. Something between us shifted slightly, like a window cracked open after years of being shut. He started sitting at the kitchen table again in the mornings. Sometimes we'd even share small conversations. "How's your garden doing?" he'd ask. Still alive somehow, I'd say, smiling. It wasn't much, but it was something. One evening, I found him in the living room, staring at an old photo album. He didn't notice me at first. He was tracing the edge of a picture. One of us at the lake, years ago, sun shining behind us. When I walked closer, he said softly, "We were happy that day." I nodded. We were. He looked up at me then, his expression unreadable. "What happened to us?" he asked quietly. I froze, because it was the first time he'd ever said it out loud. "I don't know," I whispered. We sat there in silence, both of us staring at the photo. He sighed and said, "I think I stopped trying somewhere along the way." I wanted to say me too, but the words got stuck in my throat. Instead, I reached out and touched his hand. He didn't pull away. For a moment, it felt like we were standing at the edge of something fragile, a bridge we could still cross if we both dared. But just as quickly as it came, the moment faded. He cleared his throat, closed the album, and said, "It's getting late." Then he stood up and left the room. And the distance returned, quieter, heavier than before. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the faint hum of the house, the ticking clock, the rustle of leaves outside. My mind replayed his words over and over. I think I stopped trying. And I wondered, if love dies because we stop trying, then why do we still stay? Is it loyalty, fear, or just habit? The next morning, he was already gone when I woke up. His side of the bed was cold, the pillow smooth. He'd left a note on the counter. Went into work early. Don't wait for me for dinner. I stared at it for a long time, then folded it neatly and tucked it into a drawer. A part of me wanted to call him, to say something, anything. But I didn't, because I didn't know what to say anymore. The following week, our son came to visit. He brought his wife and their little boy, our grandson. The house came alive again, even if just for a weekend. The laughter, the running, the noise. It filled every corner like sunlight after a long storm. I watched my husband with the child, the way his eyes softened, the way he smiled. Really smiled. And it made me ache, because that tenderness still lived somewhere inside him. It just wasn't for me anymore. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, I found him sitting on the porch alone. I joined him quietly. He didn't look at me at first, just stared out into the night. "Feels different with the kid here," he said. "Yeah," I replied softly. "The house feels alive again." He nodded. "I miss when it used to sound like that," he murmured. "Me too." We sat there for a long time, not saying much. The crickets sang, the air was cool, and for a brief second, it felt like we were both remembering the same version of us. When he finally stood to go inside, he said, "Good night." And for the first time in years, his voice sounded gentle. The next day, after they left, the silence felt different. Not empty, just quieter, like the house was catching its breath. I went into his study to drop off a letter that had come in the mail, and I noticed his sketchbook again. This time it was open. There were fresh drawings, new plans, new lines. In the corner he'd written, "Renovation ideas. Maybe start next spring." My heart sank a little, because I realized he was planning changes to the house, but not to us. That night, I stood by the window and watched him outside, walking the perimeter of the yard with a flashlight. He looked like a man still building something, always fixing, always planning, but never stopping to ask what truly needed repair. And I realized that's who he was. He built things he could control and love. Love was never one of those things. Weeks passed like that, quiet, predictable, distant. Then one morning, I woke up to an unfamiliar sound, a thud, followed by silence. I rushed out of bed and found him in the hallway, leaning against the wall, his face pale. Hey, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice shaking. He tried to speak but couldn't catch his breath. I called an ambulance, my hands trembling as I gave our address. In those few minutes, everything I'd been holding back broke loose. Fear, regret, love, everything all at once. At the hospital, they said it was his heart. A mild attack, they called it. He was lucky, they said. I sat by his bed, watching the steady beep of the monitor, my heart aching with every sound. He looked small lying there, smaller than I'd ever seen him. When he opened his eyes, he tried to smile. "You always told me to rest," he whispered. I laughed softly through tears. "Yeah, well, maybe now you'll listen." He reached for my hand, and this time I let him hold it. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. That touch said everything words couldn't. He came home a few days later. The doctor said he'd be fine with rest and medication. I helped him get settled, made sure he took his pills, cooked his meals. We slipped into a rhythm again, quiet, gentle, careful. It felt fragile, like glass you're afraid to drop. One evening, as we sat in the living room, he said, "You've been kind to me." I smiled. "You make it sound like it's a surprise." He chuckled softly. I guess I forgot what that felt like. There was a pause, and then he said something that broke me open. "I don't know when we stopped being us, but I miss it." I looked at him, tears rising before I could stop them. "I miss it too," I said. We didn't hug, didn't cry, didn't make promises. We just sat there, Two people who finally admitted what had been unspoken for too long. That night, when he went to bed, he turned toward me for the first time in years. It was a small thing, but I felt it deep in my chest, a quiet, fragile warmth. I closed my eyes, letting the tears fall silently onto the pillow. Because even though nothing had really changed, something had finally been said. I didn't leave that night. I couldn't. When you build a life with someone, you don't just walk out the door because the air has gone quiet. You wait, you hope, you tell yourself things can still change, but deep down, something inside me already had. The morning after that argument, if you can even call it that, since neither of us raised our voice, I found him sitting in the living room, staring at nothing. The light from the window fell on his face, sharp and pale. He looked tired, older somehow. For a second, I wanted to go to him, to sit beside him and say, "Let's fix this," but I didn't, because I knew what he would say. He would sigh and tell me we're fine, that everything's just a phase. So instead, I walked past him, into the kitchen, and started making coffee. The kettle's whistle filled the space between us. That sound, and that's all we had left now, the noises of ordinary life pretending to be company. That day, I realized something small, but painful. You can't make someone love you louder. If their heart has chosen quiet, you either learn to live inside that quiet, or you leave it behind. I didn't have the strength to leave. Not yet, so I started doing what silent people do. I stopped asking questions. I stopped expecting him to notice what I wore, or how my voice cracked when I tried to sound cheerful. I learned to live on half conversations and brief nods. It's strange how fast you can adapt to being unseen. It almost becomes peaceful, in a hollow kind of way. But peace built on loneliness never lasts. Months passed. Seasons changed. Spring again, then summer. The garden he once tended grew wild. Weeds everywhere. The porch light flickered out and stayed that way. He barely came home before midnight now. When he did, I pretended to be asleep. I didn't want to watch him walk past me without a word. Sometimes, in the early mornings, I'd find him sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee. The same seat where I used to wait for him years ago. He'd look out toward the street, lost in thought. Once I almost asked what he was thinking, but I stopped, because I didn't want to know the answer. It's strange. You can live beside someone for years and still not really know them anymore. Like the person you loved got replaced, slowly, quietly, by a stranger who wears the same face. One night, I found an old box in the attic. Inside were photos, our wedding day, our first home, vacations, birthdays. I sat there on the floor, holding one picture in particular, the day we signed the papers for this house. His arm around me, both of us smiling, proud, hopeful. I remember thinking, what happened to these people? Where did they go? Was it something small that broke first, or did we both stop caring at the same time? I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. I think I had used them all long ago. So I just sat there, surrounded by ghosts of moments we'd buried without saying goodbye. That night, when I went downstairs, he was still awake. The TV was on, volume low. I said softly, "Do you ever miss us?" He looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "Us," I said again, before everything got so quiet. He stared at me for a long moment, then said, "I don't know what you want me to say." And that was it. The last conversation we ever really had. After that, silence became our only language.